So welcome everyone to the session of the IEA Bioenergy Triennium Conference for 2021. This is a session that will look at feedstock mobilization and specifically looking at the role of regional biohubs to enhance biomass mobilization. There'll be presentations through this session from both contributors to Task 40 as well as contributors to Task 43 with an overview of some of the work and work we've supported through those tasks over the last 3 years, looking at biomass mobility, as well as the role of biohubs. My name is Mark Brown. I'm at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia, and I'm also the task leader for Task 43. I will act as the chair for this session, introducing the speakers. We've roughly planned for the 5 presentations to take about 12 minutes each, with 3 or 4 minutes at the end of each presentation to address questions, which you can enter through the Zoom question and answer section. I will keep an eye on that throughout the presentation. Please note that in the interest of time, I'll select 2 or 3 questions to ask the presenter to follow up. And if your question hasn't been addressed, we may look to address that post-session by sharing that with the presenter. Please also note that we'll have the 5 presenters as a panel at the end, where we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes to discuss the topic more broadly. And again, we'll return to some of those questions at that point. So at this stage, I'll begin our presentations. And I'd just like to introduce Rick, who is a researcher at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And he will be speaking today around biomass feedstock supply chains and future markets. Rick, the microphone's yours.
Thank you, Mark, for your kind introduction. Let me open the presentation. So today, and thank you, Mark, for your introduction. And what I would like to discuss today is a project which we are working on and which is close to being finalized, is the project Regional Transitions in Existing Bioenergy Markets. And I will talk today about one of the outcomes, which is the biomass feedstock supply chains and future markets. So the interaction between what these feedstock supply chains mean when we look into the dynamics or the transition of existing as well as emerging markets of the bioeconomy. And just to provide some background on how this project fits into IEA Bioenergy Task 40, when we look back into the previous decade, IEA Task 40 mostly focused on the development and fostered also and facilitated the development of international bioenergy trade as well as sustainable supply chains, either for large scale and modern bioenergy applications, but also market creation of bioenergy carriers, and mostly from including some very highly relevant deliverables, including the commoditization of biomass, for example, but also monitoring international bioenergy trade developments, which was one of the key developments linked to bioenergy in the last decades. When we look at the current Task 40, so since the current triennium, which is close to an ending, the focus has changed towards more of the deployment of bio-based value chains. So it has broadened its focus from bioenergy towards more biomass and also bioenergy in the context of the larger bioeconomy. So that includes also, for example, new markets of bio-based materials, but also interactions with other renewable energy sources, as well as the food and feed markets and material markets. It also means that if we look to supply chains again, which is also and remains an important focus of IEA Task 40, we now also look in how and also how it would fit into these new and emerging markets of the bioeconomy. Value creation from biomass as and biogenic carbon, how it fits, and that includes, for example, also carbon utilization and also storage of biogenic carbon, for example. Perhaps also the focus now is more towards the future, with innovation, perhaps also more science, and we include multiple intertask projects and strategic task projects. And this project is one of the strategic task projects of IEA Task 40. A short overview includes that we look into 3 different activities. Activity 1 includes the interplay of local biomass sources and the international tradable biomass commodities. It has focus on current and future markets of bioenergy, also including insights from model-based scenarios, for example. And then we look into more detail, including, and we zoom in really into the region, including specific sectors, the chemical sector, for example, but also a case study for Germany specifically, just to look at if you look at from the angle at the national level, how it's, what insights we can create for that. And I will present more of these details, at least for Europe, in this presentation. Activity 2 is about strategies to increase the mobilization and deployment of local and endemic low-value heterogeneous solid biomass sources, and more of that will be presented in the next presentation by Fabian Schipfer. And then finally, in activity 3, we really want to zoom in to the farm level almost, including insights from agent-based modeling of how more biomass or new crops, for example, can be adopted by existing biomass markets, also farmers, for example, to mobilize these new sources of lignocellulosic biomass. So why do we look at these different scales? I think one of the challenges is to create insights that are relevant for fostering the deployment of bioenergy in a sustainable way, is that we need insights on the long-term projections of bioenergy to meeting climate targets, for example. So we need these insights from these larger integrated assessment models, for example, or larger economic models that can really grasp the complexity of large commoditized markets, like including, for example, global trade between world regions. However, these insights on their own are not sufficient, I think, and they provide more relevance if we also look and combine them with insights for the mid to short term, like 2030 or up to 2050. What the intended policies are, but also the deployment pathways at the national level. So insights from national determinant contributions, for example, but also national energy climate plans in Europe, for example, but also insights from regional and national model-based scenario analysis. So what does the energy transition look like if we look at a climate target of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees as a maximum? Finally, I think that also links most importantly to the session is still one of the most complex, at least biomass and feedstock supply on its own is very difficult to address if we look to the future, because it's very regional and local specific in the end. So it really matters if a biomass supply chain or a biomass feedstock is located close to existing infrastructure linked to, for example, port terminals that enables a long distance trade, or if it's located inland, for example. And therefore, we need also to look at the details of supply chain management, as well as more detailed modeling on land use, for example, but also agent-based modeling, one of the insights which we include in this project as well. So I think one of the main challenges is still of how can we combine all these different insights which are available from research, but also included in IEA Bioenergy, to provide actionable insights for planners of the bioenergy transition, but also other stakeholders in industry, for example. How can we really reduce the uncertainty which is linked to biomass deployment, and also see what actions are needed to mobilize more biomass sources? So I think one of the challenges we have, at least in this project, is to combine insights at different levels and see what we can provide. I'd like to give one example here, just for the European Union, and we have more examples in this project as well. But so if we look to Europe and we look at the most recent projections made, we see that bioenergy has grown from the period 2000 to 2020 at a rapid pace. And this was also already explained that was monitored also by IEA Bioenergy Task 40. And if we look to the future, you can also see that it is more, it looks quite certain, but also it looks difficult, because when we look to the period 2020 to 2030, at least according to the latest impact assessment of the European Commission, we can see that it hardly grows. If we look at the EU reference scenario, which is in line with the 40% greenhouse gas reduction and 32% renewables by 2030, we can see a slight increase of biomass, which is in line also with national climate and energy plans, more or less 11 to 15% increase. But if we look at the latest scenarios for the Fit for 55 program, which is in line with the climate neutrality by 2050, we see actually even a decline of bioenergy demand up to 2030, mostly as a result of more efficient and electrification of heat markets, for example, in the residential sector, but also some other drivers. It is, however, followed by a steep increase of bioenergy, and I think this is also one of the challenges that the European market at least has, is that as long as we want to develop bioenergy chains, I think the shift from having a more or less stable supply demand towards a steep increase will be challenging to set up sustainable supply chains. If we compare it to the results of integrated assessment models, these are for the Economic Modeling Forum, for also meeting a 2-degree target, we can see a larger range of uncertainty from these models, which is also in line with the nature of those models, of course. And if we compare it to the biomass supply potential, we can see at least there should be sufficient domestic biomass supply available in the EU. But one of the main insights we can also see is that forest biomass, which represents about 2/3 of biomass supply in the EU today, will not be sufficient on its own to deliver to future markets. And we can also see that there is a need to mobilize more biomass sources from other sectors, like including agriculture residues, but perhaps also towards 2050, increasingly also dedicated energy crops, lignocellulosic energy crops. And developing these markets take time, and I think that is also one of the main challenges we have still, to mobilize more biomass and to reduce the pressure on forest markets, and at the same time that we have now a stagnation in development of bioenergy markets followed by a steep increase. I think it is something that needs to be well coordinated. Just a short detail on future markets according to the Prime's projections, and the reason for this trend is that we have this decline for residential markets, which is shown here by the yellow colors in this graph by 2030. But we also see a steep increase of new markets, and it includes, for example, transport and most importantly, markets that are hard to decarbonize, like the marine sector, but also aviation. And we also see still, although this is something which is intended to be phased out, is an increase still in power markets. So that includes decentralized combined heat and power, but also large-scale power generation, either with carbon capture and storage, so BECCS, for example, because the growth of electricity demand cannot be met alone with with wind and PV. I think this is also one of the key insights, that existing markets could also still substantially grow given the challenges of the energy transition. And therefore, again, reliable, cost-effective and sustainable lignocellulosic feedstock supply chains are essential for developing these newest markets, because most of these markets will actually create more demand for lignocellulosic biomass. A short insight in what models say about trade for the EU, and we can see in this graph that then this is a combination of energy system models at the European level on the top two, EU roadmap and biosustain, and integrated assessment models, as well as integrated assessment models from the EMF Forum, and we can see that the EU is projected to remain an net importing region of biomass, and we can also see from the models that look at more the member state level in the EU that they are more modest in the demand. Whilst again, these integrated assessment models, they can actually grasp this commoditized and interregional markets, but at the same time also they show that they increase the uncertainty, and also given that bioenergy, the demand could even be met by really substantial amounts of imports, on average 35%. While if we look, for example, at the most recent impact assessments, it's more in line, like 7.5% to 10% of domestic biomass bioenergy demand in the EU. I think so. There's a larger range of uncertainty, which is more in line with the nature of these models. But again, and we see even a net export in some of these models. But on average, I think we could expect an increase in trade, but not to the extremes of these integrated assessment models. And one of the reasons why these models are more extreme, I think, because they lack actually the details of the logistical challenges of infrastructure, of biomass mobilization. And this is something which is even in these European models or even on national models an underexplored topic, and also a reason why this project and this biohub project is so important. So challenges include, for example, that the development of energy crops at the feedstock production level require a substantial amount of time, and also the mobilization of low-value underutilized biomass sources requires investments in infrastructure, for example. While on the supply side, if we look to the end use, if we want to steer towards higher value applications, including flexible power, but also these advanced biofuels for marine and aviation, still also they require, for example, integration with hydrogen markets or refining capacity. So they might be located again, not close to the source of biomass. So we see the first advanced biofuels plants now being developed within the fields where biomass is available. But if we look to these new markets, we can also expect that more and more these plants can also, at least part of it will be linked to refining capacities, or at least where the field demand is, or the availability of, for example, hydrogen to refine these fuels to the required levels. To conclude, models, but also national plans, for example, show that biomass remains important in meeting climate targets, but its position in the energy system will likely change. We see that there is at least a need to increase the use of low-value underutilized biomass sources on the demand, while on the demand side also we see that at least there is an aim to steer towards higher value applications, including, for example, power, but also high temperature heat, aviation and shipping, and bio-based materials and chemicals. And bioenergy with carbon capture and storage or utilization is also expected to play a substantial role in meeting climate change mitigation. While we see this clear direction, I think one of the main issues is that the logistical challenges and experience from biomass mobilization strategies of developed markets and existing infrastructure that really remains underexplored. And this project, the Regional Transitions Project, at least we try to provide some of these insights by analyzing future market developments and identify possible logistical challenges, and also explore strategies to increase the mobilization and deployment of local, endemic, low-value heterogeneous solid biomass sources, and as well as new energy crops and changing markets. And more on this will be presented by Fabian in the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Very good presentation. Just note that we do have one question here that Biana has provided some written comment, but specifically just looking at the issue of energy density of biomass and how or what the views are from your perspective on how to deal with that in terms of the length of supply chains and how you potentially look more local than international as you would with a fossil fuel. If you had any comments on that.
Yeah, I think we have seen already for dedicated power in Europe. We have seen that for example, pretreatment close to the supply of biomass or pelletization already enabled industrial users at large scale remote from the source of biomass. So on the one side, that is successfully applied, and so the density per se is not an issue if we at least have biomass hubs that process biomass in a required form. But I think the demonstration of pelletization is just, we are still at the start of that, because we can also liquefy biomass at regional, at small scale, decentralized levels, in form of pyrolysis, but also hydrothermal liquefaction, for example, and mobilize or at least ship these biomass sources to refineries that are located where hydrogen or where refining capacity is available. And so again, the supply chains will become more complex, including decentralized pre-processing or more processing, and further end use also downstream and processing downstream close to the final end use. And at the same time, we'll also see that where we have a refinery, we see lignin, for example, coming out, which is now mostly combusted, but could also be valorized again. So this will again increase the complexity of these supply chains. So densification is one of the issues, but I think so more complex supply chains and further development of these markets will enable actually a more efficient use of biomass.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Some good comments there. We do have a couple other questions here, but I think I'm going to hold those for the panel discussion, because I think our upcoming presenters will shed a bit more light on those topics, and we can possibly have a group discussion at the end. So thank you, Rick. We'll move along in our presentations now. Now I'd like to welcome Fabian, who's with the Technical University in Vienna, Austria. He's also a contributor to Task 40 through IA Bioenergy, and he'll be speaking or continuing on from Rick's discussion here, talking about biomass supply mobilization strategies.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. Thank you, Rick, for setting the scene. And thanks to the Task 43 panel for having us and us being able to show our Task 40 insights here. So I will present now the activity 2 of this project Rick talked about, the Regional Decisions project, which is focusing on the strategies, mobilization strategies for biomass, in particular, not only for bioenergy, but also for a broader circular bioeconomy. One second. Right. So under the umbrella of local, low value and heterogeneous biomass resources, we understand, as Rick also already showed, a variety of feedstocks, especially residues from forestry and agriculture, also different waste categories, and also from agriculture in the future, hopefully, as well as energy crops such as short rotation crops. These feedstock have a particularly high feedstock diversity, and this diversity, coming from the word biodiversity eventually, is also reflected in the physical properties of these feedstocks, which is decisive not only for how we can use them and what we can make out of them, but also how we can mobilize them. They are also diverse in origin, which means that we have different types of landscapes where they're coming from. We have different types of stakeholders involved in the mobilization of them. And they're also diverse in legal status. And when it comes to deriving mobilization strategies, especially we from Task 40 have to admit that our previous work focused more on rather homogeneous resources and energy carriers, and often even energy commodities. And thus we did not really train for this question, but we still put our heads together and thought or had some brainstorming and tried to figure out what could be mobilization strategies, now not only for energy, but especially also for a broader circular bioeconomy, based on this heterogeneous biomass resources, which could at the same time also strengthen regional or weakened regions. And we came up with we put together several mobilization strategies and clustered them in the end in these 3 assessment levels. Starting with the top-down assessment level, the legislative framework, I have to say from the beginning now, already focusing very strongly on the European level. Then the bottom-up, the technology level, and both of them combined in the market structures, which was the initial expertise of the Task Force Consortium, I would say. So we compiled a little scientific paper out of it, and I want to present some selected results from this paper in the next slides. Much has already been written and has been developed in the field of technology in the highest assessment level. We especially talked a lot about pre-treatment technologies. Rick already answered some questions with regard to pelletization, briquetting, chipping. These are all focus points of the task 40s. There are quite some papers out there on torrefaction and also liquefaction through fast pyrolysis, as well as gasification. And we focused strongly in the last years on improving the transportability of these energy commodities for international supply chains. But in this report and in the next years, we want to stress also that even more so, these technologies, these densification technologies, actually improve the storability, which is going to be a key aspect when it comes to flexibilization of the energy system in under high pressure of an increasing photovoltaic and wind intermittent electricity production and consumption of our energy system. So the next question we addressed here, freely thinking in our brainstorming, we talked a lot about decentralization of these pre-treatment technologies, optimal location, optimal sizes of these pre-treatment technologies. In the future, we want to look also into what's the smallest functional unit for this decentralization. Where do we have chances for even mobile or portable pre-treatment technologies, which can be nicely combined with geographic information systems and big data and deployed in an optimal way with regard to, for example, weather data. We provided some insights in the market, what's out there at the moment and what has been researched with regard to mobile and portable pretreatment. When it comes to the legislative framework, as I said already, we focused very strongly on the European level. And here's my laser pointer. Verified, at least from the very top-down level, a rather coherent framework with support for funding, for bioeconomy innovation, and for rural and regional development. And we list some more upcoming important legislative or policies which have to be watched. On the other hand, and since especially the European Biomass Action Plan in 2005, there have been many interesting high-level interregional projects on biomass mobilization, which focused in the first years until 2013 strongly on biomass mobilization for bioenergy. But since then, these projects also have a strong focus on bioeconomy, and not only bioenergy, but also biomaterial services, and became more and more geographic information system, GIS supported, and also more generalized with regard to output, not only for the regions in focus of the study or who are participating here at the consortium, but also other regions such as input or output data for the whole European 28 member states. From a social scientific literature perspective, we derive the insights into the current frontier in supporting policy coherence between the different governance levels. The multi-level governance concept tries to understand how to bridge and bring together the different levels from the European level down until the neighborhood and district level. The big question remains how to integrate these regional policy levels with the national energy transition and the European goals. But what we also discuss in the report, we not only see that literature discusses broadly the challenge of this complexity of the supply chains and the different governance levels which participate in supply chains, which is, for example, represented via the social acceptance topic. But more and more so, we also see discussions on participatory processes. And here, especially, we want to open up the discussion of the enormous decentralization potential regional supply chains have. The resource democratization, which addresses different stakeholders participating and actually having a say in the supply chain, should not be neglected when talking about regional transition and mobilization strategies. We also see that these topics are not yet addressed, for example, by the European Economic and Social Committee, which talks a lot about energy communities, but even the word energy communities is not really associated to biomass, but more to, let's say, photovoltaic communities. For the mobilization strategies on the market level, we had some input from the ongoing Task 43 project, which is still some the next presentation is coming. The physical biohubs, which are regional biomass processing depots. And here again, the only thing we want to contribute is to say that they don't only have a market and trade facilitator. They don't only facilitate market and trade, but also they facilitate the storage, coming back to the flexibility topic. And in the future, eventually we're gonna see topics like nutrient recovery and sustainable landscape management becoming an important issue, which could be nicely addressed via these physical biohubs, which could be at the same time also complemented by virtual biohubs. And here I just want to drop this interesting, maybe research question into the round to analyze how these different virtual biohubs and trading schemes for biomass commodities have developed in the last decades. Some of them where we don't find their links anymore online or they have been hijacked, and some of them are existing and running and ongoing. I think they are really inviting for some econometric or at least some interview or discussion of how what's the success factors of virtual biohubs or trading platforms for biomass commodities. Finally, I want to address one controversy we run into in this project. We update our commoditization debate of the last 5-6 years we had within the Task 40. Commoditization of bioenergy carriers or biomass or biogenic carbon carriers for a bioeconomy, will the commoditization itself, the market creation itself, improves the security of supply and demand, which is the positive side, and the competitive markets also reduce in overall the societal costs by equilibrating market effects of the prices. And in the end, they also create the system flexibility when you can share and interchange commodities between regions of high demand and high supply and low demand and low supply, or yeah, the other way around, or cross versa. What we came across was a discussion also in literature addressing our publications, where especially the correlation between the globalization and transport distances with the loss of stakeholder involvement was criticized. So this is eventually quite an old globalization topic for some of you, but now talking about sustainability certifications, we would like to open up the discussion if we can solve this conundrum by also providing some socioeconomic certification, ensuring a minimum stakeholder diversity for these supply chains. Thus, the trade distance would not be the issue anymore if you make sure that the highest standards are applied wherever you get the biomass from. Respective projects in this realm are, for example, the Horizon 2020 Star Pro Bio, which was finalized about 6 months ago, which analyzed the multiple assessment criteria for biomass certification for a bioeconomy, and this needs definitely further elaboration. So we conclude in this quick teaser of the paper, first of all, that the circular bioeconomy is going to provide energy and material and nutrient services, products, and so on. And these will be based on a low value and high heterogeneous biomass resources, which are going to need dedicated mobilization strategies. There are readily deployable niche innovations out there, and also interesting policy frameworks and funding opportunities and interregional activities for biomass mobilization. The market creation strategies remain the bottleneck. Mobilization can support structurally weak regions through resource democratization and foster market diffusion of sustainable and equitable practices in forestry, agriculture, and the blue economy, agriculture. But we also highlight that the quantification of these potentials and their impacts would be needed to design market instruments. And this would first of all go eventually through the system modeling, energy system modeling, bioeconomy modeling, economic metabolism modeling, where we would have to integrate the quantification of these potentials and impacts. With this, I thank you for your attention and give it back to Mark Brown.
Thanks, Fabian. Just looking at the questions here, we do have one new one. One of our participants is asking the question about the potential role of certification in improving the acceptance of biomass and how that fits into mobilization. Do you want to maybe comment on that before we move on?
Yes, I would like to. So we had, before we made this study in the last triennium, lengthy discussion on the commoditization of wood pellets. You will find it all on the Task 40 homepage with the papers and the econometric analysis we did on that. And we see interestingly that some buyers or some people, commoditization is not will not only work through certification, or like having the standards at a certain level will not only work through certification, but you will also have to have the information for people displayed properly, and people have to have the whole transparent market in front of them in order to actually understand that they should not, that they can also buy from the international market, and they can still be sure that certification ensures on the other end of the supply chain that all standards are met with regard to sustainability, but also with regard to, as we propose, socioeconomic factors. So I think extending the certification debate and topic will bring us to a point where we can freely buy something on international markets and be sure that this fulfills the highest standards. Please look into our Task 40 results. I must confess, back then we didn't think that far yet, and we rather analyzed the pellets market with regard to how mature the market is at the moment. And there we saw actually the barrier of people evaluating regional biomass supply chains much higher, even though eventually biomass from around the corner would not have been they would not have been worse off with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabian. So again, the two live questions there, we're going to hold those for the panel discussion as one of our starting points. I might ask the webinar organizers now if we could launch the poll questions we have for the participants. We'll leave this poll live until the end of the next three presentations, and we'll use your views and feedback on this poll as a starting point in our panel discussion as well. So if you could just respond to those while we're enjoying the remaining three presentations, that would be fabulous. So moving on, our next presenter is Walter from, where I'm going to pronounce this poorly, but bear with me, Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And Walter is going to give us some insight into a fairly major piece of work they're doing there around biomass to commodities and extending the biomass supply chain using biohubs. Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Let me start sharing. Yes. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah, no, that's good, Walter.
Okay, thank you for the reassurance. Yes, I am Walter Elberson from Wageningen University and Research, and I work at a Food and Bio-Based Research Institute, where we make, in the bio-based group, we make all kinds of non-food products out of biomass. And that can be energy, fuels, but also fiber products, chemicals, and bioplastics, for instance. And for that, we need feedstocks, and that is where I am looking at. Today, I want to talk about the need for real lignocellulosic commodities. They are needed first to make efficient and circular use of available biomass. In other words, it's not just a demand, it's also what is produced has to be used in a circular way. A real commodity will lower the cost of biomass supply, but only if it's a real commodity. The so-called transaction cost will be lowered. And one of the important things that it will deliver is an increase in security of supply. And that has been a plague for a lot of the modern biomass systems, that in the end, the security of supply was not assured. So lignocellulosic biomass is by far the most abundant feedstock available, and it's being used for electricity and heat, but also for chemicals and long distance fuels more and more. We're switching to that, as already was mentioned. And one of the things is that we need to define and develop and implement a limited number of lignocellulosic intermediate commodities to link sources to markets. I have been working on development of biomass chains, and if you look worldwide, we see that a lot is being underutilized. Some of these pictures I've taken myself, and you see here how sugarcane is still being burned in the field, how rice straw is being burned in the fields. Delhi is now suffering the consequences. You see how farmers burn their biomass in the fields in Africa, and you see if it's not being burned, there's clear overabundance being left in the fields, also causing problems. And if we just look at the crop residues, both at the field and in processing, there's a huge potential that is largely not being utilized. The other thing that has happened recently, more recently, is the insight in the circular economy. And what is that? And the principle is, in general, or that you have to design out waste and pollution. You just saw a picture where there was a lot of pollution. And the other thing is, the trick is to keep products and materials in use. And that's very important for bioenergy because it's an end use. So you have to switch the way you think about supplying biomass for bioenergy. And the other thing is to regenerate natural systems. For biomass, that especially means that you have to keep the productivity of land. And that is what worldwide you see a lot, that land is being used and it's not, the quality is not maintained. So you always have to keep that in mind if you use your biomass. And the trick to do this is to cascade the use of your biomass, both in time and in the products you make out of it. And I always like to show this picture. It's from Mrs. Högelmeier in Germany, and they looked at the current use of wood. I think it's in Bavaria. And then they implemented a number of circularity improvements. And they found that if you do that, you can produce exactly the same with a reduction in the amount of biomass you need, so 14%. And also an increase or a lowering of greenhouse gas emissions by 7%. And so the lessons is that if you use your biomass in a circular way, you save biomass and thereby land. Or you can also conclude that biomass, more biomass is being released for other uses. And of course, in view of the deforestation issues we are now trying to address, that is very important. Okay, one of the reasons that I looked at these commodities was that a lot of the companies that use lignocellulosic material to produce ethanol are having trouble with their supply. And so we asked business developers, where would you like to put your factory, your large-scale conversion factory? Near the biomass, as it's generally now done, or near a large-scale hub, a harbor or so, where you don't have the biomass per se, you have to supply it, but you have some other advantages. And this is a very simple table that shows the assessment. And the good thing if you build your factory near the biomass is that the cost of biomass is low. However, the security of supply is better if you can supply it from everywhere. The availability of infrastructure is also larger if you go to a big hub. And the economy of scale is also bigger. And I like to show this by this simple graph. And that is, if you want more biomass, you have a bigger plant, then first you make more money, but at a certain moment you make less money. The reason is the economy of scale of the plant is larger. So this is positive, but at a certain moment, the cost of the biomass goes up. So you're limited in your scale. The things that are also underestimated, if you need such a big plant, you need specialized personnel and expertise. In the middle of nowhere, where there's a lot of biomass, that is a real problem. And another thing that is often not considered is the value of the residues. And in a big hub, you have other offtake of your residues. Well, if you are just near the biomass, there's no other application for these residues. So overall, you would like to have a large scale conversion factories, and you would rather get the biomass to these applications. So we looked at what is then a real commodity. And so one of the things is, of course, we have the old story, and that is it has to have a high energy density, dry, low volume, but also low ash. This is, of course, for the quality, but also you want it to be nutrients depleted. First, because in all these bio-based applications, nutrients only have a negative value, and because we need to leave them behind. They have locally a value. So we're working on systems to remove these nutrients. A commodity is only a commodity if it's really fungible. That means it doesn't matter where you get it from or what the source is, it's always the same. So you have to really standardize the quality. But another thing is that if it's a commodity, you can also standardize the transport, the contracting, the insurance, and the conversion systems. So if you know this is the commodity, you can build all kinds of systems based on that commodity. And you do not need one-on-one contracts. You can rely on the commodity. And to be sure you get your supply, you want to use the markets. And that means you need really functioning trade systems, financial instruments, futures, etc. And you need high tradability. And finally, I think it's also important that we standardize the sustainability. That should not be an impediment to the development of real commodities. And on the right, you see this little figure that we made to illustrate it. You have all kinds of sources of lignocellulosic biomass, both in the field and in the processing. And you want to bring them not too far. As Rick already said, you would like to make this system as small as possible to make your commodity. What are these commodities? Well, as already said, pellets, pyrolysis oil, and a lot of other, maybe wood chips, etc. And then the transport becomes cheaper, and there you have all kinds of conversion systems. And that is, but the trick is, of course, not to have too many commodities, different commodities, but then the whole system undoes the real purpose. Now, what are these candidates? Was already, we have wood pellets. I would argue they are almost a real commodity. I don't think the tradability is enough. Pyrolysis oil seems a very nice option. It's small, but it has it in it to be really a real commodity. All kinds of feedstocks can be turned into more or less a standardized pyrolysis oil. Herbaceous pellets, they are often not mentioned, but there is as much biomass available from wood sources as from herbaceous sources. And it would be great if we could make that into a commodity also. Torrefied pellets, wood chips, and biocrude. So these are all the candidates. Now, how do we get there? As said already by others, the conversion facility should be as small as possible, and it to work. One of the big problems is, or the nice things is, the smaller, the more of the biomass that could be mobilized can be mobilized. So you do not end up with so-called stranded biomass. It's also important that we define only a few bio-based commodities. And we see governments have invested in developing these standards, and there are far too many of these standards. They are an impediment to developing real commodities. It's important that we have these commodities for all biomass types. Wood, which is rather simple because it's rather uniform, but also grass, straw, bagasse, etc. And it's important that these commodities can be applied for all the uses that we have now. We always talk about heat and electricity, but it's important that they can also be used for chemicals, transport fuels, and jet fuel, for instance. So we should set these standards as wide as possible and be careful not to add frivolous demands. And one of the things is that we see that often these commodities are just defined by the first buyer. But I think we should involve all players in this game. So this is the biomass producers, but also the machine builders, the regulators, insurance, the bankers, the transport, and of course the final users. I would like to leave it at that. And I hope we can discuss this very interesting and important subject. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Walter. Just noting a question here in the group, there's, and I'm going to have to interpret a little bit. They're asking the question of if there's any quantified analysis when we talk about near biomass versus near logistical center, and how are those factors weighted or considered? So what are we really suggesting or talking about when we say close to biomass versus close to the logistics center? Do you have a view on that, Walter? Well,
I see that the previous speaker was also talking about even machines that can be moved around. So yeah, I would say the smaller the system, the better, and the more adaptable. And for the rest, for these applications, you have to look for the economy of scale and get as close to it as possible. And then we're talking often about a few million tons per year. And I think it's important that people realize these things generally do not match. So local for local, for a lot of the applications we're looking for will just not work. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think we might keep that one live as well for the group to kind of mull over later on. A fair bit of chat going on. There was this fairly specific question about converting sugarcane. Again, I think we'll leave that for post-session discussion. So I will thank you again, Walter, and we'll keep moving through our presenters.
Pleasure.
Our next presenter is Biana, and she's an expert in circular and sustainable bioeconomy at the Energy Institute in Croatia. And she's going to talk to us about agrarian biohubs, a model for expanding post-harvest facilities on biomass supply. And Biana, if you want to share your screen.
Yes, thank you. So I'll share my screen. Share. So I will thank to the previous presenters, especially Walter, because my presentation is going to pick up very much on his research and actually go more towards landlocked areas of biomass supply. So what we are looking at this, we are specifically looking at agrarian biohubs. So how to mobilize these herbaceous biomass from agriculture. So the agricultural biomass, it's either cheap, like affordable, but it's very scattered around, so the cost of collection is rather high, or it is available at the location, but then like in dedicated crops, but then the production costs are high. So we were trying to find like a narrow line in between, and we were addressing the SWOT analysis that we have made in the current triennium on biohubs, how to compare the sustainable biomass supply via biohubs to the current alternative. And then we were thinking, what would be the effect of expanding post-harvest facilities business model to agrarian biohubs on farmers' income? So that means in supply terms, whether they would be motivated or attractive, whether that would be an attractive solution for them, and as well the biomass supply to bioenergy within bioeconomy, so in terms of demand. And then from that, we would support some evidence-based decision and policy framing. So just to say that the biohubs refer, as previously stated, as an intermediate place where the farmers, growers, so Walter has made it quite clear what we refer to as biohub. And we can continue on that. So these are the activities that we have made in the current triennium on biohubs, and they are all available on the website. So we started with looking at SWOT analysis of biohubs in Europe, then in North America, and that was all summed up and sprinkled with Australian Oceania touch and made in this dashboard. Later, you will hear more details in the next presentation. So in terms of SWOT analysis, we actually looked at the weaknesses and threats, because we thought if these are considered, everybody likes the strengths and opportunities. So let's see what are the weaknesses. From our several interventions with SWOT analysis, we have collected weaknesses that are clustered around investment, the size and uncertainty of the investment and the risks, and the ability to mobilize the capital, organizational, so that's operational and maintenance costs, how we're going to do that. Then again, risks attached to it, and lack of local demand. So let's see what we could do. So we looked at the post-harvest facility linear business model. So they are operational 1 or 2 months per year. And that means that 11 to 10 months per year, they are available in terms of roads, infrastructure, vehicles for work, truck scale, conveyor belts. In short, the investment costs in expanding the post-harvest facility to agrarian biohub would significantly reduce the costs, and that actually employs one of the basic Porter's strategies of cost minimization. And why would the post-harvest facility expand to biohub? So first of all, the post-harvest facility, even if it claims or starts working on its sustainability aspect in the business model, it will go to this reward, it will win this reward from the consumers with willingness to pay up to 29.5% more than the competing product. So that is a meta study that was worldwide made. And then the climate change increases farmers' risks and uncertainty. Always farmers are exposed to risks of weather and changes and institution and market spikes and stuff, but the climate change elevates that risks and makes it more frequent. And that also the biomass supply then is handicapped, and that consequently handicaps the bioeconomy investments. And then we were actually applying these Porter's generic strategies of cost minimization, differentiation, and focus. So in the previous presentation, you have seen all of those in place, where Walter has focused on narrow down the commodities to those that are most tradable, for instance. So what we have done, we have picked 3 commodities that represent a larger market. So cereal, So we have cereals, alcoholic beverages, fats and oils, and we look at wheat, wine, and olive oil. And post-harvest facility would be silo, winery, and olive mill. We don't assume whether the ownership is together and whether the grapes are produced together with the winery. So we don't look at the partnership or ownership issues. And then we look at biomass, and biomass is actually secondary biomass byproduct, which is from wheat straw. Then from wine you have those 5, and then from olive oil those 5. And then what is important, that not all the commodities at the market are behaving the same. So for instance, wheat is the example of a staple food, of homogeneous food, and that behaves as an inferior good. It means that as the income decreases, it will be eaten more, it will be consumed more, and the price formation is global. Then we have wine as a typical example of luxury good, which scarcity, given the climate change and unavailability to the market, actually would not diminish the demand. On the contrary. And then we have also olive oil, which is staple food in some regions, but also health food in other regions where the olive oil is not cultural or originating. So it's considered as a substitutional food, which means if the price goes up, it will be substituted with other fats and oils to do that. So why would we do that? Because of the climate changes, we expect severe changes in agroecological zones and the yields of these commodities. And then we looked at we had a snapshot of market relations. So we said the primary good has a price, and the biomass has a percentage of that price, because if it has the higher price than the primary good, then they will switch positions. And also what is important is to see the size of the primary good market. So at the staple food, you will see it's a very large market, but of low value because it's a staple food. And all of them, and then you see and this is niche product actually with olive oil. So all these claims, conclusions can be actually applied on the wider range of food commodities. And then we will just look for the purpose of this presentation and wine and winery. Yeah, call it as a personal preference. So what we have seen is to see that we have this winery example. So the winery in the linear business model produces wine. And this is a market of $686 billion. And this is what we see here is a bioeconomy pyramid. And of course, everybody wants to be here on the top of the pyramid where the added value per unit is the highest. But by what we did to orientate in this bioeconomy pyramid with the byproducts to make them commodities. So we said by volume, there is wine, seeds, stalks, pomace, and pruning ratio. So for 1 liter of wine, you would have these ratios of byproducts. And you can see that seeds are tiny, tiny parts of it. And that's very likely why nobody looks at that, and it's very precious to have the grape seeds. But then look at the pruning, quite substantial. And then this is by volume and this is by value. So we did these ratios again for 1 unit of money, you will have the common market. And this is the common market as a raw material. So one would sell stalks as raw material for agro pellets or herbaceous pellets, and pruning as well. Pomace could be sold as an input to produce grappa or type of hard spirit from grapes. So this would be the ratios from the market to sell. And even if this winery starts to market or consider this biomass as a raw material, then what would happen? It will chip the part of this willingness to pay that is up to 30%. So it will not be 30%, but it will chip in. So it will be able to sell the primary good at a higher price than the competitor. So that's one benefit and motivation. And then if we sum up of all these by value units, then we can end up actually that the bottle of wine, the price of this winery earning is not only 1 unit, but 1.66 units. So that would be quite motivation to embark into this expanding of business model to circular bioeconomy. But then, of course, we are looking for commodities that are on the upper part of bioeconomy pyramid, and anything that works, anything from these. So this is the smoking wood instead of pellets. Here, raw material, the smoking wood. Here is the flour from grape skins, and this is charcoal as a luxury good, not as a primary good. And this is agro pellets. So this could be depending on this is very important, capacity of the manager and the knowledge of the manager of the post-harvest facility to create the local value chains and embark to become a market player. And this is something what Walter and Fabian were talking about. So if you compare this by value, you can also compare that everything that is above this still works even better. But what is important, the ratio that proved that hubs improve the resilience to risk induced by climate change, applying the classical diversification strategy. So first we had cost minimization. This is why we have looked at the biohubs and now the post-harvest facilities, and now we are looking at the diversification strategy. And what is the challenge? The challenge is that not every post-harvest facility can have the same circular business model, because the spread of manipulation is rather different. So in the luxury market, you will see that, for instance, this is the price of agro pellets. So in the primary good is 3% in winery, but in the wheat silo relation, it is 45 to 60% of the primary product. And now at the moment when the wheat prices are peaking. So it is different approach in which post-harvest facility will change into the circular business model. And then we have looked at the 4 archetypes of business model, circular business models, and we see even if we engage the bioenergy, so the biomass to supply hot water, to provide hot water at the post-harvest facility, or heating or drying, so it's the lowest risk investment, it would allow the willingness to chip the part of the willingness to pay higher for the primary product. So that's quite good incentive. Of course, climbing up to the bioeconomy pyramid would allow wider collection area for the biomass. And then conclusions to guide the policy makers. So with what we believe that we have proven that the existence of agri-biohubs is beneficial for farmers, post-harvest facilities and local bioeconomic development, as it allows income diversification to the all market players. Agri-hubs managers are motivated to pursue cascading use of biomass, of course, because they will earn more if they are able to extract the active compounds from wine grape stalks. They would earn more than from agro pellets. For that, you need the know-how and the strategic partnership as transferred as capacity. Pursuing this cascading use of biomass, again, is widening the collection area for biomass, and even cheaper ones can toggle along to the more expensive. So then we have the primary product cost carries a proportion of biomass cost as well as the bundle. So we have the cost sharing platform, which again goes towards cost minimization. And it is, as Walter said before, biohubs are attractive to smaller market players too, which biomass was not deployed so far. And then we have these different ways how to pursue the expansion. to the politicians, so support of designing regional agri-biohub transitions to see what are the sizes. 25,000 tons per year seems quite reasonable for me. Forming strategic partnerships to climb up to the value pyramid, introducing innovation intermediaries, which is very important to spread the word of the options that lay around the biomass use, and deployment of local bioeconomies in terms of short value chains. So to conclude that the bioenergy is the least risk investment option and already available along the pyramid to achieve the circularity. And that we believe that it's very likely that the transition to agrarian biohubs will stabilize and expand biomass supply for bioenergy within bioeconomy. And these are the references, and this is the research team. And thank you for your time, and apologize for extending the time.
Thanks, Biana. Just one question here in the group, kind of alluding to the issue of marginal cost versus marginal benefit of some of the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid. Do you want to talk about how that was looked at or addressed in the project?
Could you please repeat the question? I didn't understand you.
So the question of as you get lower down on that pyramid, you potentially have an issue where the marginal cost increased of capturing and transporting that material isn't or is more than, or is a significant portion of the marginal benefit that it adds to the overall value.
Yes, that's
So
true, because
that cost value ratio, right?
yes, and that's why we were looking at the post-harvest facility that will have multiple commodities placed at the market, because that would be cost sharing. So any of these biomass primary products, byproducts, they will not be competitive if looked at as a single commodity at the market. It has to be a bundle, and it has to be done within the one facility of cost sharing platform. It can't be by its, I mean, it's proven that it can't be, otherwise we will have mobilized biomass for bioenergy all the way.
Okay, thanks, Biana. And yeah, we still have a couple of live ones there for the group discussion, and we've got one more presentation to go. So just for our panelists, once we complete Mohammed's presentation and he has his 1 or 2 questions, I'll get everyone to unmute on the panel so that we can have a more open discussion, and we'll start our panel discussion by looking at the result of the poll questions that were posted. So thank you again, Biana, and we'll move to the last presentation scheduled for this session. And this presentation is actually looking at a consolidation or a platform that was done through Task 43 to present case studies in biomass mobilization, supply chains, and biohubs. So I'd like to introduce Mohammed, who is a researcher here with us at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia. And he's going to take us through some case studies of sustainable biomass supply chains and biohubs, and look at the global map-based knowledge sharing platform that is put together by him as part of the work with Task 43. So Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and hello everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. So we go to the last presentation, as Mark said. So we'll talk about the case studies on sustainable biohub and biohubs and supply chain within the biomass space, where we have created a global map-based tool to demonstrate the SWOT analysis. So IEA Task 43 has planned and is planning to support development and delivery of the biohub and biomass supply chain over the past few years. As Biana said, there has been a SWOT analysis workshops completed in Europe and Canada. So the industry and the stakeholders has come together to identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat of different projects. But we thought that there is a gap, and the gap is how to merge the SWOT analysis result and the case studies information into a unique dashboard or platform, if you want to call it, to bring all the information together so that the industry could use. And we thought that if we address this gap properly, potential user could be growers, biomass growers, farmers, processors, investors, planners, regional communities, and governmental offices, and etc. The method that we use, we first created a spreadsheet to collect basic information on the projects and their SWOTs. Locations included, of course, us, Australia here, Europe, North America, and South America. Sanjeev Srivastava is my colleague here at USC. He's expert in GIS. He suggested that we convert Excel sheet into a GIS layer using ArcGIS Pro 2.3. And then he used the GIS layer and converted that to a web-based map that we are now showing you guys. Results is very simple. I would say that was our vision, to be simple, to be useful for the industry and the government. So the tool actually is developed and is available on this website. It's for free for anyone. So once you log into this website, you could see a global map, and then on each point you would see your case studies identified there. At the right side, you have the case study names, and at the right side, you would see the regions and how many observations you have had, and who is the case officer who has put the information together. So my colleague is used to call this a dashboard, but I'll call it as a biomass Solomon carpet, where you don't need any carpet like Solomon, but you just need to go to this website and easily see what is in the map and where it is and what's the weaknesses, strengths, and opportunities of different projects around the globe. So I think Fabian was talking about regions and neighborhoods, and then coming from the regions to European level or broader level. But this map actually could very well link with what he was proposing. At the moment, what we have two case studies from North America, one case study from South America, and one from Europe, and 3 in Australia in the map. So basically, when you go and you just click on each point that you can see here, a box will open for you that you can scroll up or scroll down, and you will see the information about the location of the biomass, the characteristics of your feedstock, and the last point, an important one, is SWOT result of each case study. What we are doing now, so we have basically created this first version of the tool. It's available, but we are seeking more information. And if you have any biohub or biomass supply chain case studies which are in the line of IEA Task 43 strategies, feel free to complete an Excel-based template, which is very simple. So here you would put the information of the location, biomass supply, and SWOTs. And if you don't know what to put in the SWOTs, it's so easy. You can go to the 2 tables from Canada and Europe, where Biona has developed this with her colleagues. They have developed these tables. You could easily pick up some of the items if you don't know. But if you know what's the SWOTs of your biomass projects, then just put in the Excel file and email us in Task 43 to Mark or myself. So first one, I just want to now show you some of the case studies that has been uploaded, and we just go as I said, on a Solomon carpet around the world now. So Australia, in Western Australia, so if you click here and you just scroll down, you see a point here that is a project from a Sustainable Development Group led by IEA, task, I guess 40 or 43, not sure about that, but the project was an integrated tree crop system in Western Australia. And it, basically you see the location here. So it was a short rotation tree where the biomass produced within an integrated system where you have a wheat farm basically, and then within a specific spacing, the trees were planted, and those trees were used to produce about 130,000 of biomass supply, green metric tons per year, to produce pellets, biofuel, and bio oil. As you can see here, one of the strengths is improve aquatic and wetland systems in WA, which is very important. So they want to basically plant the trees to help with managing the water level there, and sanitary is also an issue there. Weaknesses is lower yield of biomass per hectare, of course, because you are not using whole land, you just are using a partial land. But that's an opportunity. Why? Because you could use basically the residues from your plantation, forestry, and also the residues from the agricultural farm. So you would have basically two types of materials. Threats, as always, there is threats to anyone, to any organization, and biomass is not accept of that. So competition with other crops and competition with solar and wind, especially solar here in Australia, is one of the threats. So one of the issues that we have here, I just want to point here that, so location is very important. So if you guys provide, or any user provides us the exact location, then we could just point, for example, in a region level or in a neighborhood level. But if it's not provided, then there would be a middle point of that state that would be selected. So here we would be a little bit crazy to have a biohub in the middle of Western Australia where you have the deserts there. So that's a point that we need to address in future, especially from user perspective. So Biona has uploaded information around a project, a joint project by IEA Task 43. So that's from Styria here in Austria. I love that place because I was studying there a decade ago. So the project is about basically using harvesting residues and woody waste to create pellets, and annual supply is 1,000 tons per year. So basically in the tool, you could just scroll down, but I've just put the outcome here in a table so that we can review what's the strengths and others from different projects. So in this project, Biona has listed some items as strengths, so easily implemented, low labor demand, and basic expertise needed. Weaknesses, harvesting machinery need adoption. So there are some negative social perception about this project in Styria in Austria. So opportunities, like any other probably biomass projects, so creating local jobs and employment is one of the opportunities that is associated. And threats, so one of them could be lack of local demand for agro pellets. So let's move on from Europe to North America, where our friend Daniel from University of, I think, Laval provided this information. So Daniel is working with the team with Evelyn and Nelson there. So the project that they had was about, again, using harvest low quality wood and woods without any market for producing bioenergy, biofuel. As you can see, it's very similar to the Western Australian case study, 130,000 cubic meters annual production to produce biofuel and bio-oil. Let's check what's the strengths there. The strength is security of supply, which is consistent what has been demonstrated in IEA workshops around SWOT's analysis. So security of supply, because basically you have too much materials available. So I haven't seen any projects that you don't have supply. So the good things about biomass is that you have plenty of materials available, but the key is how you get the market around that to use it. So the weakness, one of the weaknesses is large investment required and infrastructures as well to make that happen. The opportunity associated with this particular project is low cost of the biomass, and again, creating local jobs for rural area. So one of the threats is that there is no demand. So there is lots of works there to overcome with this threat there. So last case study, South America, where our friend De Souza has put this information on a case study named Sustainability Movement in Movement. So they are actually looking again at harvesting residues and waste to create biogas or RNG. I don't know what's RNG, but I assume it might be renewable something gas. So strength there is that the production is very simple. So, and one of the weaknesses is that they need a level of technology that could actually convert this harvesting residues to biogas. So opportunities, they have said that in Brazil there are other crops and biomass resources available, especially from agricultural perspective, that could merge and create a larger volume of biomass. And one of the threats that our Brazilian friends are facing for this project is that they need specialized lab technologies and accessories to do analysis on the biomass quality. Conclusion, we can conclude that SWOT analysis can support and assist to make a critical decision for the biomass planners, and a web-based dashboard like this that we have created can provide a unique access point to put the technical information and SWOT results. We also conclude that we need to diversify the use and develop the tool further to increase the scope by adding the data and analytic capabilities of the tool. The tool basically is very simple at this stage because, as I said, that was the vision. But over the time, you would like to probably add more capabilities. So main strengths of biomass cases in this project was volume and availability of biomass as a resource. So reaching and depth of having a diverse range of suppliers is a key. And again, dashboard here can assist and align strategies by providing accurate information. The main concern of different cases, we observe that there is a lack of financial resources to expand and diversify existing operations. So we think that dashboard here can play a role to provide a better understanding on the resources that we have. And with that, we might be able actually to minimize the uncertainty around the biomass supply chain management and usage. Dashboard also can highlight where we have less developed areas. So from a government perspective or IEA perspective, you could easily pick up some areas that you would classify as a less developed, and then concentrate your efforts to make the developments there. We have some recommended strategy here, but it's very general because we didn't have too much information. So it's what our colleague Saskia, who is an international business expert here at USC, has put together for us. So she believes that dashboard is a transparent collaboration basis for the industry, and we can try to have more inclusive and diverse industry participation to benefit small and medium-sized businesses, and optimizing strengths and opportunity fits by ensuring an increased availability of biomass. One of the strategies is increasing agility. We think that access to a flexible, agile, and well-established supply chain would mean that we would increase the capacity of the bioenergy industry. And once you have higher capacity, it means you would be basically like a football club. So if you have bigger capacity, then you have bigger reputation on the world and bigger also credibility. And then once you have the higher capacity and reputation, overcoming weaknesses by focusing on your strengths would be much, much easier. Last one, we think that this tool can help the industry to reduce uncertainty. So a structure well-developed and well-fitted by different and various data, basically, the tool could help reduce the difficulty of managing a complex governmental and regulatory structure. Is very hard to pronounce that word. And once we pass that stage, we might be able to meet our priorities. And with that, we might be able to operate better in an uncertain markets and help with the progress. So with this nice picture of Bodrum Forest Park, waterfall here in Southeast Queensland in Australia, I would like to say thank you for your attention, and also I would like to thank Mark and his boards in IEA, Biono, Bruno, and Daniel and others who really helped us to put this project together and move it forward. So thanks for your attention, and happy to answer any question if you have.
Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, look, just watching the questions, they all lend themselves quite well to a group discussion with all the presenters. So I'm just giving folks another minute or two. With that, so welcome all of the presenters to have their microphone live here, and I might ask that the webinar coordinators, if we could have a look at the results of the 2 poll questions that we shared with the participants as our starting point of discussion. Okay, so just looking at those replies, in terms of the first question, what do we view as kind of the main source? We've got both the agriculture and forestry residue ranking quite high. Similarly, short rotation coppice, very close is the residues from the agro-food processing industry. So I might just ask each of our presenters to maybe offer a bit of comment on what they see there in the replies, in terms of where our participants see the biomass coming from. And if you could speak maybe specifically to what that potentially means for a biohub and supply chains as we've been discussing. So in no particular order, I'll put Bjorn on the spot to start with.
Thank you, Mark.
You're
So,
welcome.
so I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the poll, because it looks like, I don't know whether the poll was before or after Walter's and mine presentation. That would be interesting to know. Well, I think that we need to abandon the linear business models, and that the circularity that has much of the support in the among the countries and the governments to go to low carbon, to carbon neutrality, and biomass is renewable carbon. So I think that the most sustainable way is to just increase the material efficiency, and biohubs can help that.
Thanks, Bjorn. Fabienne?
So I guess I clicked on wood harvesting residues in forestry. We will see. I can imagine quite some residues coming up here due to two factors. One factor is climate change and also risks with regard to the carbon stored in the forests and the management we will have to apply on the forest to be sure that they are continuing storing the carbon they should store. And the second, a bio-based economy, as we're talking here in this session, with interesting potentials also in the future to store furthermore carbon in, for example, bio-based buildings or like wood skyscrapers you want to think about, and the residues coming from these processes of this bio-based economy. Thank you.
Fabienne, Walter, what are your thoughts on the feedback we got there?
Yes, well, I think that the second question, about the strategies to get, and you see that the efficiency of forest and agricultural use, and we see also the capacity to convert it to biomass, to convert the biomass to biocommodities. I think the things are recognized, that we need to be efficient. The question is, what is efficient? And of course, we now have the circular economy. And I do think it dictates that the final use should generally be postponed, but also that underutilized biomass has to be used. People always forget that they don't want to use all kinds of biomasses, but they forget then that the consequence is that it will turn itself into CO2 without even the energy being used. And I think, this is these are answers I do recognize. But we have to convert this into practical actions by the people who can decide about that, and it's generally not us, the scientists.
Thanks, Walter. Rick, what are your thoughts on those poll results?
Yeah, I think it also shows that there's no single answer here. I think it nicely shows that we have potential. So also, but we see the largest potential indeed in perhaps in residues that are underutilized, as following up on what Walter said. But perhaps the core question should then be, why aren't they utilized yet, and how can we incentivize that? So what role can a hub play to stimulate the mobilization of either underutilized residues And if we look to current pellet markets, I think what we see is that they are not value creators as such, because the supply chain becomes more expensive. It just reduces the cost of long distance transportation and better handling at the power plant, for example. So a core question should be that how can we increase the value creation at these hubs already, also to create the viability of these these more complex supply chains. And that could also incentivize perhaps mobilization of underutilized residues that are of which the value is upgraded at these hubs. And I think secondly, if it comes to second choice, I think energy crops, I think we should not forget about the complexity and time it still takes to develop these up to a commercial scale.
Thanks, Rick. And Mohammed, do you have any additional comments on the poll results from your perspective?
Not really. So our colleagues described their views very well. I think what's obvious for me, and I want to thank the participants basically, because we did a project here a few years ago in Australia looking at basically mapping the biomass resources we have that in the country. And the answers of the first question is very consistent. What we have found here in Australia, that crop harvesting residues, especially from agriculture, is probably from the volumetric perspective, is the main source of biomass that we should concentrate. And then it's followed by the woody harvesting residues in the plantation. What is surprising for me is the green waste that we got from the city councils, and it seems that it's some area that, in my opinion, would need to be relooked, because it's just not about bioenergy, but it's about helping the councils in different, especially in mega cities, small cities, to manage the waste in general, not just from bioenergy perspective, but from a land management perspective as well. And I totally agree that increasing efficiency would be probably the first option, because we know that once we increase the efficiency, especially if it's supply chain, then we can easily reduce the cost so quickly and so easily. So yeah, well done on the participants.
Thanks, Mohammed. Yes, I'm going to come back now to some of the questions that our participants put up. And I'm actually going to combine the first two questions from the Q&A section, because, and I'm actually going to reverse the order, because I think there's a lot of interplay in those two questions. And the first, or to kind of set the scene, there's a question here of why is there a challenge or an issue with traditional supply chains that we have, and they've mentioned the sugarcane industry, but we could say the same thing about traditional forestry supply chains or other agricultural crops, is why are those challenged in mobilizing lignocellulosic biomass? And then the follow on, or the linkage that I see there, is there's another question there that looks at what is the cost benefit balance between hubs or direct transport. So I think if we are suggesting that traditional supply chains are struggling or may not be as efficient as we'd like for mobilizing biomass, then I think the follow-up is there a role for biohubs, and what is that balancing act that we're trying to hit on? So again, I'd be interested in the views of the panel, and I might start this time with Fabian, just kind of looking at the traditional handling of materials and logistics versus how we integrate biohubs to mobilize what we're trying to achieve.
At this point, I think it has to be said that also the traditional supply chains, they are already quite cascadic when we think about forestry biomass being used in the European Union. For example, we have already residues of this biomass supply chains. When we produce paper, for example, pulp and paper, the whole tree and its different parts are used in different value chains. Already you have the stem wood being used for construction wood. You have the different branches being used for pulp and paper, and then you have the sawdust being pressed to wood pellets for bioenergy use, and the last residues. So we will have some cascadic and circular concepts in the supply chains. The difference will be in that these supply chains are already set up. The infrastructure is in place. We deal with commodities, as Walter put it in his beautiful figure, easily fungible products which can be transported over longer distances and can be utilized in the different industries. And when you compare this to, let's say, some straw and how we mobilize straw pellets, for example, are only used in niche applications in Spain, I guess, and maybe there was some topics in Poland. Can't hold me accountable for this right now, but this is the mobilization of this product is much more difficult due to the lower energy density, due to the properties in the pelletization process itself. Yeah, maybe I will give now the question how biohubs will contribute to this, to another person, to not occupy too much time, speech time here. Maybe to Biljana.
I kind of guessed it that it will be to me. So thanks. Well, it's all about money. Whether we talk about bioenergy, we talk about commodity, we talk about anything, it's at the end, it gets to the money point. So in Europe, and I believe it's in the other countries as well, there is this energy law, which says as a fundamental that energy needs to be available, secure, sustainable, and then one thing is affordable. So it's limited market. You cannot price the biomass, whether it is secondary biomass or primary biomass in terms of short rotation copies, because the market doesn't stand it, because it has to be affordable. So it's limited market. So in that, your business case is failing. And then you have to think out of the box if you still want to have bioenergy. Until now, the thinking out of the box was premium price. But now we learned that this is not sustainable. And now what we have in bioeconomy, we have opened a wide range of biomass applications. And then this thinking out of the box goes in another direction. And this is business models. So what we need something to piggyback the costs of biomass for bioenergy collection in this cascading use. So whether this biomass for bioenergy will be delivered together with something else that would have higher cost along the bioeconomy pyramid, and then this primary good actually bears the cost of transportation, and then biohub can help, because then it will be made into the commodity, which would be lower by volume or increase the energy density. So it would be storable and more manageable and thus more marketable. So that would be my reflection in this. And I'm really happy to talk about these out of the box solutions, because there are lots of things to be done there and to exploit. And there are things actually ready-made, like in the example of this Chiverly Agrar in Austria. They made it by having a small innovation, allowing collection of corn cobs together with grains. So they minimize the cost of collection. And I mean, it was very smart, robust solution. So things are available. Yeah, just have to spot them. Walter, you like to talk about commodities and money.
There. Okay, thank you. Well, what we see in the Netherlands, I think, is that we're switching away from making electricity and heat from biomass, and that we know the niche for biomass is more in chemicals, jet fuel, where we need the carbon. And you see that people always think the local for local solution is best. But if we want to go there, then we need complicated large scale factories. And these factories will only be invested in if, the technology works, if you have a market, and if you have a security of supply. And for these large factories, I think the logic is you need these commodities. So and a commodity, the beauty is that you do not have one-on-one relationships. In a previous report, we looked at when do you have one-on-one relationships in agriculture, and when do you have a commodity. And everything that needs to be processed locally, if you have oil palm, sugar beet, sugar cane, the farmers and the factories are completely intertwined. And so, and they dictate the size. But for lignocellulose, that does not have to, you do not have to be intertwined. You can just send the intermediate, just like wheat or soy. You know, a soy processing factory in Rotterdam, they don't have one-on-one relationships. They are essentially dependent on commodities, and for wheat, the same goes. And that is, I think, a logic. We should not underestimate the cost lowering effect of commodities. It would be nice to put some effort there, but if you see, for instance, just the amount of lawyers you need just to set up a new contract one-on-one. If you have a commodity, you have one contract. The insurer will know exactly what it is, you know, so your costs go down. Also, the person who makes these machines, they can make one design and sell it everywhere. And these effects, that is the beauty of the commodity. And the problem is, however, that people think the short distance is better. Well, yes, your transport is better, but all the other things are worse, as I hope I showed. The other thing is that biomass is where it just happens to be. And if you don't use it, it turns itself into CO2. And if Australia emits a lot of CO2, we have the problem in the Netherlands. So CO2 doesn't care where you are in the world. And so these are the type of notions these people who make decisions should better understand. How do we explain that so that better decisions are made?
Thanks, Walter. I'm just conscious of the time. And I realize that not all the panelists have had a chance to comment on that question. So I might just note that we do have a couple of questions left in the Q&A box. One of which I think we could spend the next 2 hours discussing as a group, looking at how we potentially de-risk investment for mobilization. So I would suggest that we take that question offline. I know there's scope to send these questions to the panelists to do a more considered reply that can be made available to the participants at a later date. And I guess I just want to make sure that anybody on the panel that had a comment to make on that last question who is waiting gets a chance, and then I might wrap it up there. So is there any last thoughts on that question we were discussing? Okay, and again, thank you to all the participants. And I'd encourage you to join me in the chat group here as well in thanking our 5 presenters of giving a fairly comprehensive overview of the work we've been doing across Task 40 and Task 43 about trying to establish and improve the knowledge around efficient supply chains for sustainable biomass and bioenergy. a very challenging question, as noted by the questions still on the table at the end of our panel. But I do hope we can keep the debate up. I do understand that both tasks have support to go on into the next triennium, which means we will get the opportunity to tackle those challenges. So again, as scheduled to finish here at 7 p.m. in Australia, and I believe 8 or 9 a.m. in Europe. Thank you, everybody. Our organizers are noting the Wonder Me opportunity. So again, those that are able to, there's an opportunity for all the participants to interact and have some coffee chats, if you will, around the presentations. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, participants, and especially thank you to my panel.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. See you
So
guys.
see you
Very much.
at this special room, Wonder Me, in a second. So there is a link in a chat to visit. Let's see what happens if I press that.